At my own family's celebration, my father stood up, raised his bourbon to the sky, and toasted my brother for bringing honor to the Stone name. Then he looked at me, cold, flat. As for my daughter, he said to 100 smiling guests, her choices are her weight to carry, not mine. They laughed, I smiled. But 10 seconds later, the TV behind him flashed breaking news, and the nation finally saw who the real soldier was. My name is Riley Stone. I'm 33 years old, a Major General in the United States Army. And tonight, my own father reminded me that in this family, titles mean nothing when they belong to the wrong child. It was a sweltering July evening in Missouri, the kind where the air sticks to your skin and the smell of hickory-smoked ribs clings to every breath. Our family's ranch was dressed up in patriotic bunting and red checkered tablecloths, as if the 4th of July had decided to extend itself just for us. The adults sipped Budweiser from dripping bottles while the kids played tag between hay bales and lawn chairs. On the surface, it was a Norman Rockwell painting. I wore a plain flannel shirt, faded jeans, and boots still dusty from the base. I looked out of place among the designer polos, sundresses, and manicured smiles. Liam, my older brother, Captain Liam Stone, wore a custom-tailored navy suit. He held court in the center of the lawn, spinning stories about Pentagon strategy meetings and rubbing shoulders with senators. People laughed too loudly, nodded too eagerly. He was the chosen one. I tried to catch my mother's eye. Eleanor Stone stood by the buffet, ladling mashed potatoes onto Liam's plate as though it were a sacred offering. I said, "Hey, Mom." She glanced at me, her smile tight and distracted. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered quickly, eyes darting back to Liam. "Be sure to grab some corn before it's gone." She turned away, that fast, when Dad, Harrison Stone, rose from his chair with a glass of Four Roses bourbon in hand. The yard fell quiet. His voice, aged by years of command and arrogance, boomed across the gathering. "I'd like to make a toast." Every head turned, phones dropped, conversations died. He lifted his glass high and looked directly at Liam. "To my son, Captain Liam Stone, a man who carries the Stone family legacy with honor and brilliance." Applause erupted, whistles, cheers. Pride soaked the air like humidity. Then he turned to me. For a second, our eyes met. His were icy, assessing, and empty. He cleared his throat and added, "And my daughter, well, her choices are her own burden to carry." That was it. No name, no glass raised. Just a dismissal so sharp it sliced through the cheers like broken glass in a punch bowl. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion I'd heard in combat. Even the crickets stopped. I felt my stomach turn to stone. My breath caught. I stood there, suddenly hyper-aware of every person's gaze, shifting awkwardly, of the neighbor's kid's jaw dropping mid-hot dog bite, of the way Liam grinned smugly into his drink. I wanted to vanish. Then came the twist of fate no one expected. The outdoor bar's flat-screen TV, previously playing background baseball highlights, flickered and switched to a Fox News special bulletin. The host's voice was somber. "We've just received confirmation from the Department of Defense." My heart stopped. The screen filled with the Pentagon seal, then my photograph in full Army combat uniform. My face, my name, my rank. The Chiron Red, breaking 33-year-old Major General Riley Stone, the strategic mind behind global AI counteroffensive. The silence was absolute. No one clapped, no one cheered. My father's bourbon glass trembled in his hand, the amber liquid shivering with it. The pride in his eyes drained like a faulty dam. And I didn't smile. I didn't bask in it. I felt nothing, or rather, I felt too much. A flood of rage and sadness and vindication, all battling to rise. But mostly I felt a hollow pit in my chest, as if I'd jumped from 10,000 feet without a parachute, and was still falling. They saw me now, but not as a daughter, only as an anomaly. And still, no one said a word. As I stood there, frozen, my fingers clenched involuntarily around the condensation-slick bottle of water I hadn't even realized I was holding. No one met my eyes, not my uncles, not my cousins, not even the neighbor whose son I'd once pulled out of a flipped pickup during a flash flood. Everyone looked at the ground, at their drinks, at anywhere but me. The TV kept playing, my name again, this time with a scrolling headline about my contributions to the International Task Force against Rogue AI Combat Systems. But no one commented, not a single "that's incredible" or "I had no idea." Just silence. I turned and walked toward the house. My boots thudded against the wooden porch. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of every year I'd spent fighting. Not just wars abroad, but for space to breathe in my own family. I passed the picture wall in the foyer, photos of Liam at West Point, Liam shaking hands with politicians, Liam standing with Dad next to a new truck. My face was nowhere. In the kitchen, I stared at the counter. My mother's strawberry pie sat there untouched. I had made that pie. I brought it, hoping maybe, just maybe, it would earn a small moment of warmth. But no one had asked who made it, and now it sat, like me, unnoticed. Behind me, the back door creaked. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. "You didn't have to storm off," my mother's voice said, soft and full of tension. "I didn't," I replied, barely above a whisper. "I walked," she sighed. "Your father, he didn't mean to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "He didn't even say my name, Mom." She didn't answer, just stood there, probably wringing her hands the way she did when she couldn't fix something without breaking something else. "I'm a general," I said finally. "I've led missions that saved thousands of lives, but I'll never be enough, will I? You don't have to prove anything to us." But I did, and I do, and I think I always will. She stepped closer, but I backed away. I wasn't ready, not tonight. That's when I knew this wasn't just a bad night. This was the blueprint. This was who they'd always been. And I was done asking for space at a table that had been set for someone else's success. The bourbon glass in my father's hand trembled when the TV announced my name. But my own hands were steady. That kind of shake, of surprise, of disbelief, I'd experienced it at 23, not 33. After the party dissolved into murmurs and silence, I walked inside the house like a ghost that no one noticed. The sound of crickets returned outside. The laughter was gone. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my boots, but no one called after me. Upstairs, the hallway smelled like cedar polish and thyme. I stopped outside the family room. The fireplace mantel had always been a shrine to achievements, mainly Liam's. But for a few years, there had been one frame that broke the pattern. A photo of me on graduation day from airborne school, sweat on my brow, mud on my uniform, eyes lit up with a pride I hadn't felt in years. It was gone. In its place, a polished photo of Liam in a dark gray suit, grinning next to a U.S. senator. I stepped closer, not a speck of dust, freshly cleaned, revered. I called out, "Mom!" She appeared at the end of the hallway, holding a tray of empty glasses. "Where's my picture?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry. It was too flat for that. "Oh," she said, too quickly. "I put it away. It was getting dusty." "Put it where?" In the storage. Somewhere downstairs, I think. Don't worry. Somewhere, I repeated. Like me, somewhere. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She vanished down the stairs without another word. That's how I found myself in the attic 15 minutes later, flashlight in hand, climbing into heat and shadows. The door creaked open, revealing a space that smelled like dry wood, old paper, and everything no one wants to remember. I had to duck to avoid low beams. Dust danced in the beam of my flashlight. I searched box after box, holiday decorations, Liam's childhood trophies, even an entire tub labeled Thanksgiving linens. Then, in a far corner behind a broken rocking horse, I saw it, a soggy cardboard box with faded black marker. Riley's stuff. The handwriting was unmistakable, my dad's, all capital letters, like labeling a piece of government equipment. I pulled it toward me and knelt down. The tape was brittle, and the top flaps opened with a crunch. There, jumbled together like trash, were pieces of me. My first marathon medal, still attached to the red, white, blue ribbon, now wrinkled and dulled. A green beret, gifted to me by my grandfather, Pop, on the day I was accepted into Special Forces selection. He died 2 weeks later. A laminated letter from my battalion commander, praising my decision-making under fire in a convoy ambush in Afghanistan. Beneath that, a handful of broken plastic G.I. Joe figurines, some old notebooks from middle school, a worn-out hoodie I hadn't seen since high school. It was a museum of disregard. Not one item placed with care, no wrapping, no frame. No sign of anyone valuing these things. They were artifacts only to me. I touched the green beret gently. I remembered the night Pop gave it to me, sitting on the porch swing with his oxygen tank hissing, telling me, "You're going to do more than any of 'em, girl. Mark my words." I guess he was right. And still, here it lay, next to a broken toy truck and a deflated soccer ball. At the bottom of the box, half-bent and water-damaged, was my Soldier of the Year certificate from the 82nd Airborne Division. I had received it in 2016. I remembered calling home that day. I was so proud I could barely get the words out. I had said, "Dad, I won it. I really did." They called my name in front of the whole base. His reply was as casual as a grocery list. "Good. Liam just got accepted into the MBA program at Georgetown. He's moving to DC soon. Hey, I have to go. Long-distance calls still cost something." Click. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for a year of my sweat and sacrifice to get folded into nothing. Now I stared at that warped paper. It used to hang in my barracks. I had laminated it myself. And here it was, bent, curling at the edges, crammed behind a torn Batman folder. I sat back on my heels. The attic creaked. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. My heart had long since hardened to these small betrayals, but something inside me calcified in that moment. A decision, or maybe a resignation. They never saw me, not the real me, only the burden of me. And now even my victories were inconvenient clutter. I picked up the medal, the beret, the certificate. I folded them gently into my lap, smoothing out their edges with my palms. My fingers moved like I was handling explosives, because in a way I was. These weren't just items. They were everything I'd built, everything they didn't want to display because it didn't fit their narrative. The house groaned again with the settling heat. Somewhere downstairs, someone turned on music, classic rock, probably Liam's playlist. I looked around the attic one more time, then I spoke out loud, to no one. "I am not the forgotten one. I am the proof you ignored." And I closed the box again, this time carefully, as if the past deserved at least one person who wouldn't throw it away. Back in my childhood bedroom, I placed the box at the foot of the bed. The posters were gone, replaced by beige walls and a decorative sign that read "Home Sweet Home." Like the house itself had tried to forget I ever lived there. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the beret in my lap. A memory hit me, clear, precise, painful. I was 16. It was the night before my first state track meet. I had trained for months. Dad had promised to come. He didn't. That night, Liam got a B+ on an advanced math test, and Dad took him out for steak. I remember standing on the podium with my ribbon and scanning the crowd, hoping maybe he'd show up late. He didn't. Mom said, "He had a work thing, sweetheart." That's when I first learned. His version of love was conditional. Liam's version of success made sense to him. Mine never would. Now, years later, I was still standing on that invisible podium, ribbon in hand, audience gone silent. Except this time, I wouldn't wait for applause. I remember the taste of powdered eggs and stale coffee more vividly than any birthday cake from my childhood. My first years in the Army weren't glamorous. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, sleeping in a shared barracks that smelled like old boots and industrial cleaner. My meals came from plastic trays. My paychecks were barely enough to live on, but I still managed to send money home. Every month, like clockwork, I wired a portion of my check back to Missouri. I told myself it was for the house, maybe for new windows in the upstairs bedroom that always leaked during thunderstorms. I imagined Mom buying groceries, Dad finally fixing the porch steps. That's what I thought I was doing, helping, being a good daughter, a responsible adult. A soldier who could carry more than just her pack. I skipped vacations, turned down weekend getaways, and declined invitations from my unit. While they went off for beers or trips to Myrtle Beach, I stayed behind, microwaving dollar ramen in my room, rerouting my fun money to a family that barely acknowledged my existence. I once turned down a 4-day pass to save for what I thought would be my parents' anniversary gift, a new dishwasher. I ate off cardboard, so Liam could eat off porcelain. Then came the call. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where I let myself indulge in a second cup of coffee and half a chapter from a Clancy novel. Mom called while I was folding laundry. Her voice was cheerful, rushed. "Thanks for the money, honey," she said. Liam looked amazing in that Armani suit. Fit him like a glove, perfect for the New York trip. The networking went great, by the way. You should have seen the photos. At first, I didn't understand. I actually smiled like an idiot. "What photos?" "Oh, you know, from the mixer. That rooftop event at the Empire Hotel. We wouldn't have managed the flights and hotel without your help." My hands froze mid-fold. "You used the money I sent for Liam?" I asked slowly. "Well," she said, hesitating for the first time. "He really needed to look sharp. These opportunities don't come around twice." I don't remember much of the rest of that conversation. I think I made an excuse and hung up. My heart was thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The room spun slightly. I had lived off dollar store groceries, passed on replacing my worn boots, rationed toothpaste toward the end of the month. Also, my golden boy brother could wine and dine in Manhattan. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at the floor for a long time. It felt like the oxygen had been drained from the room. That was the moment something snapped. Not in rage, not in drama, just finality. I never said a word about it to them. I just stopped sending money. No explanation, no fight, just silence. Weeks later, the phone rang again. It was my father. "Riley," he barked, "since when did you become selfish, cutting off support to your own family? Do you think you're too good for us now?" I held the phone a few inches from my ear. His voice was familiar, commanding, entitled, like I owed him a report. I brought it back to my mouth and answered, calm and cold. "I'm just learning from the best, sir." Then I hung up. That was the first boundary I ever drew. No arguments, no rebuttals. Just a quiet wall built brick by brick from every ignored sacrifice. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. Years later, I'd come across a quote by General Patton. "Accept the challenges so that you can feel the exhilaration of victory." That day, the challenge wasn't war. It was knowing when to stop giving to people who saw me only as a pipeline, never as a person. I stopped buying steak dinners for a man who never once asked if I was eating. The strangest part? No one followed up. No one asked why the money stopped. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a void where expectation used to be. At first, I felt guilty. I'd wake up at night thinking maybe they were struggling. Maybe I was punishing them too harshly. But then I'd remember the way Mom said Armani like it was a magic word, and how Dad's voice dripped with accusation instead of concern. That guilt, it faded fast. I started spending on myself. Not luxuries, just dignity. A decent mattress, a real winter coat. One weekend, I even treated myself to a cabin trip with a few squad mates. We split a six-pack and grilled burgers in the cold. It was the first time I laughed in months. I didn't tell them about the change. I didn't need to. They'd never asked about my life anyway. Only what I could give to theirs. That's when I truly understood. Silence isn't weakness. It's armor. It's strategy. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing at all. And I wore that silence like a uniform. The last words my father said to me rang in my ears. "You think you're too good for this family?" He never asked if I was okay, never once wondered what it took for me to keep showing up. I carried that silence into the next chapter of my life, the one that finally taught me what real family felt like. It started in a windowless room at the Pentagon during a high-level intelligence briefing. I was one of the youngest officers in the room and the only woman in uniform. The rest were silver-haired generals and career analysts in pressed suits. I had presented a counterinsurgency map of enemy supply routes in the Middle East, built from months of field data and sleepless nights. They glanced at my slides, unimpressed, all but one. Colonel Eva Rostova sat in the back, coffee in hand, her eyes sharp behind narrow glasses. When the meeting ended and most of the men murmured generic feedback, she stayed behind, walked right up to me, handed me a fresh cup of black coffee, and said, "You've got a strategic mind most people spend 3 decades trying to build." I blinked. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't let them reduce you to a parachute and a pretty salute," she added, then walked off. That was the first time I felt seen, not as a stone, not as a woman, trying to measure up to her brother, but as Riley, soldier, thinker, leader. Later that year, we deployed to Afghanistan, Korangal Valley. The locals called it the Valley of Death, for good reason. One night we were hit, an ambush from the ridgeline. Gunfire cracked through the cold. We were ordered to fall back immediately. But behind a large outcrop, pinned down and bleeding, was Sergeant Cole Maitre. His leg was shredded. Radio chatter erupted. "Leave him, too risky." But I saw his eyes through the dust, not fear, trust. "Cover me," I barked, breaking formation. I led 2 soldiers through open fire, low crawling and pulling Cole inch by inch until we got him out. That night, in the field hospital, Cole was groggy from morphine. I sat on the edge of his cot. He pulled a crushed chocolate bar from his vest and broke it in half, handing me the bigger piece. "Thanks for not leaving me behind, Major," he whispered. I smiled. "You would have done the same." He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone would have, but you did." That bar was half melted, tasted like chalk, and remains the sweetest thing I've ever eaten. Over time, I came to realize family wasn't who raised you. It was who showed up in the fire. It was early mornings spent sipping bitter instant coffee with tired teammates who hadn't slept but still asked if you were okay. It was the silence after a failed mission, when someone squeezed your shoulder without saying a word. It was the unspoken pact. I'll carry you when you can't carry yourself. That's what they gave me, what my real family never could. Then came the letter, sent to my APO, handwritten in that sharp, arrogant cursive I knew too well. From Liam. For a split second, I let myself hope. Maybe he'd changed, maybe he finally cared. But no. He wrote to ask me for a favor, said he was trying to get an invite to the U.S. Army Association Gala in D.C. Thought maybe I could pull some strings as a senior officer. Not a single word asking if I was safe or alive. Just a request, another transaction. I folded the letter slowly, walked it to the burn barrel behind our tent, and dropped it in. It flared up in an instant, bright, empty, gone. That night, Cole tossed me another chocolate bar. "Mail call?" he asked, half grinning. I nodded. "Junk mail." We laughed. That was the moment I knew. I didn't have to keep chasing a seat at the Stone family table. Because I already had one, out here, in the dirt. Among people who would never let me walk alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt home. Later that week, Eva pulled me aside before another mission briefing. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You know, Stone, leadership isn't about rank. It's about who still follows you when the bullets stop flying." I nodded. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense. She smiled, barely. "You've got it. Don't waste it chasing ghosts." Her words stayed with me, because ghosts were exactly what my old life had become. Faint outlines of people who once mattered, now just shadows in my rear view. And I stopped looking back. We made a habit of gathering near the comms tent late at night, huddled around metal mugs and jokes that only made sense to those who had stared down the same barrel. We shared stories, pain, silence. That's where I belonged, not in living rooms lined with polished portraits, but in muddy boots and worn hands that knew how to hold weight. This was my family, not by blood, but by choice. And that made all the difference. It started on a Monday morning like any other. I had just stepped into my office at the Pentagon, coffee in hand, boots still damp from the rain outside. My inbox was already a war zone. I was halfway through reading a briefing when my phone buzzed once, twice, then nonstop. Something was wrong. I looked up. A few colleagues were staring at me across the hallway. Not curious, concerned. Eva Rostova appeared at my door. No words, just a look. She nodded toward the break room. The television was on, and there he was, Ethan Vance, my cousin, in full West Point dress uniform, seated on the Fox and Friends morning set. His smile was modest, his hair was perfect. He was being introduced as one of the brilliant minds behind Operation Iron Echo. My operation. He spoke slowly, reverently, as if recalling trauma that had aged him. "It was the hardest decision I've ever made," he said, voice trembling slightly. "We were losing control of the AO. I had to step in. We pushed back. It cost lives, but we prevailed." I stood frozen. He described, down to the radio commands, terrain layout, even the moment of enemy retreat. Events that only someone in that room would have known. Only me. and then, as if the performance needed an Oscar, he paused and choked up. I still remember the faces of the men we lost. We didn't leave anyone behind. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Eva cursed under her breath. He's using your debriefing notes, word for word. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stared at the screen as America listened to a lie. Not a misquote, a full-blown hijacking. And I wasn't just erased, I was replaced. The moment the segment ended, I stepped into the hallway and called my father. He picked up after one ring. "Riley," he said, like nothing had happened. "You saw the interview?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "Ethan did great, polished, confident. The country needs heroes like him." I felt my throat tighten. That was my operation. He took my work, my decisions. He sighed. "Look, I told him he could go ahead with it. He needed a boost for his future. This helps the family image. You're already a general. What's the harm in sharing the spotlight a little?" Sharing? He stole it. "You're being selfish," he said. "Don't make this about ego, Riley." Ego. I nearly dropped the phone. To him, this wasn't betrayal. It was strategy, a brand, and I was just a pawn in the Stone family's legacy campaign. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, and I hung up. For a few minutes, I just stood in the hallway, my mind roaring with static. Then my phone buzzed again. A colleague sent me a link, an article just published on a respected military blog. Title: Inside Iron Echo, the Rising Star of Military Intelligence. There was a photo of Ethan, cropped perfectly to show his academy ring and commendation badge. The piece praised his unparalleled tactical instincts and cited sources inside the Pentagon who confirmed his heroism during the operation. Sources. I didn't need a name. I recognized the cadence of the sentences, the way the quotes were shaped. Liam, my brother, the public affairs golden boy, had planted this story. He knew how to work the media, how to bury credit and inflate fiction. He didn't just help Ethan, he orchestrated the narrative. I read it again. One phrase stood out. While senior officers remained hesitant, Lieutenant Vance took bold action. That wasn't just a lie. That was a dagger. I slammed the laptop shut and clenched my fists. Every sacrifice I made, every scar, sleepless night, lost friend, was now fuel for a PR stunt. Not by the enemy, by my own family. No, by the men who were supposed to protect me. By the same father who once called me a burden. By the brother who never saw me as more than a threat to his spotlight. By a cousin who cried on national television with tears made of kerosene. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, TV muted. I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is war. Not the kind fought in deserts, the kind where truth is a liability, where silence is permission, where family becomes a weapon. I used to think the battlefield was behind me. I was wrong. It had just moved indoors. The next morning, I received an internal memo. Requests from press outlets for comments, confirmations, sound bites. The floodgates had opened. Ethan's name was trending. The blog post had been picked up by other military news sites. And I had become a ghost in my own story. Eva walked into my office with 2 coffees. She set one down in front of me without a word. Then she sat across from me and looked me dead in the eyes. "You're not going to let this slide, are you?" I didn't answer. She leaned back. "You've kept quiet long enough, Riley. You let them call you a burden. You let them take your money, your credit, your dignity. But this..." She tapped the desk. "This is war." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, strong, the kind that burns on the way down. "I'm done being quiet," I said. She nodded. "Then let's get loud." I opened my laptop, and I started gathering every shred of evidence I had. Debrief logs, field reports, chain of command emails, briefing slides with my digital signature. I was going to burn the lie down to the foundation. If they wanted a storm, I'd give them a hurricane. Not just for me, but for every woman who ever sat in a war room and got told her brilliance was just a nice accessory. For every soldier whose silence was mistaken for surrender. I wasn't erased, I was just loading. The email arrived at 0700 sharp. Subject line: Suspension pending security review, priority. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before opening. The sender was official, Office of Army Personnel Command. The tone was sterile, direct, effective immediately. I was suspended from duty pending an investigation into a potential security breach involving classified drone reconnaissance data. My breath caught. They were accusing me of leaking military intel. 15 years in uniform, no violations, no strikes, not a single missed review. And on the anniversary of my enlistment, July 8, 0600 Fort Jackson. They chose this exact day to send it. Coincidence? No. Precision. The attached PDF outlined the charge. Breach of Category 1 Security Protocol. The name signing off at the bottom wasn't real, but I recognized the alias. MJR Delta. A ghost signature used by high-level clearance staff. Only a handful of people could authorize this kind of action. One of them was General Adrian Kincaid. He'd hated me since the Kabul intel shakeup. I exposed a flaw in his drone command model, cost him 2 contracts and a promotion, and now he was backing Ethan, my cousin, the man who stole my operation. This was retaliation wrapped in protocol, a kill shot by spreadsheet. My hands clenched around the mouse. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were going to bury me. I sat motionless in my empty office. Outside, DC traffic droned like nothing had changed, but inside me, something snapped. Not like a twig, like steel under pressure. The kind of break you don't hear until the damage is irreversible. For years, I'd stayed quiet. When my father called me a burden, when Liam drained my paycheck for Armani suits, when Ethan cried fake tears on national television with my war story in his mouth, I swallowed it. But this wasn't family politics. This was erasure. Institutional, deliberate, coordinated. I leaned back in my chair, fluorescent light buzzing above me, and I remembered something, an old TED Talk I'd watched during my 3rd tour. Brené Brown talking about vulnerability. Vulnerability is not weakness, she said. It's our greatest measure of courage. I never wanted to be vulnerable, but now I had no choice. I could either disappear quietly or detonate. I stood up, walked to the window, and made a decision. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to beg. They wanted a war? They picked the wrong soldier. Instead of calling legal, I pulled out my secure line. It had one number programmed into it. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call, General." "Spectre," I said, my voice steel flat. "Miss me. I need you to find a ghost, codename MJR Delta." There was a pause, then a laugh, low, amused. "Target acquired," he said. "What's the plan?" "We expose them, every message, every access point, every shell company they used to funnel this garbage. I want the chain of command, full thread. And when we find it," I looked out the window. The Capitol dome glowed faintly in the heat haze. "Then we burn it down." That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote, not a resignation, a war map. I listed every officer who could have authorized the fake report, every known alias tied to Kincaid. I dug through old comm logs, pulled favor strings with 2 intel contacts in CENTCOM, and sent encrypted pings to former comrades who owed me more than drinks. By Oro 300, Spectre sent back his first hit. A shell server in Arlington pinged from an IP inside the Pentagon. They hadn't even tried to hide it. Sloppy, arrogant, typical. By morning, I had the beginnings of a dossier, names, timelines, logins, and a simple, terrifying realization: this wasn't just about me. It was about a system that chewed up its best and handed medals to the ones who smiled best on TV. I thought about every soldier who'd been quietly pushed aside, every woman who got labeled too emotional after speaking truth, every enlisted man whose ideas were stolen by a superior with better connections. This was bigger than Riley Stone. This was rot, and rot spreads unless you cut it out. To those of you listening right now, some of you know exactly what this feels like. You've given everything to a job, a system, a family, and when it suited them, they tossed you aside. I want you to hear me when I say this. Silence is not the same as peace. Sometimes silence is the slow death they want for you. I'm done being quiet. And if they want to know what happens when you corner a soldier, they're about to find out. The next day, my access badge was revoked. I was escorted out of the Pentagon like a criminal. No announcement, no chance to speak, just a quiet walk past people who used to nod at me in the hallway. Eva Rostova was waiting outside. She handed me a manila envelope without saying a word. Inside were notes she'd taken during the last intel briefing, time-stamped, initialed, with my contributions highlighted. Her message was clear. I see you. It was more than my family had ever done. I nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and walked away. By nightfall, I had moved my operations to a secure workspace Spectre provided in an underground server farm outside DC. We set up dual screens, live comms, and encryption layers even the NSA would blink at. "We're not hacking," I told him. "We're restoring the truth." He just grinned. "Whatever helps you sleep, General." But I didn't sleep. Not yet. Because I knew the storm hadn't peaked, it was just beginning. The room was dark except for the pale green glow of 6 monitors. Arlington, Virginia, one of Spectre's many nests. He worked like a machine. No music, no coffee, no unnecessary words. Just the rhythm of fingers across keys and the occasional muttered curse. "Humph," he said. "Someone got lazy." I leaned forward. "What did you find?" "They copied your biometric ID, used a clone on the internal Pentagon net. But whoever did it left a breadcrumb." He pointed to a screen. Logan events traced to a static node inside Kincaid's office. Military IP, not a proxy. I exhaled, sharp and short. So he didn't just approve the suspension, he executed the breach. Spectre nodded. "And it gets better." He brought up an encrypted email string. The header was familiar. Mil-int suffix, Kincaid's digital signature. But the recipient? "Ethan Vance," I said aloud. Subject line, Narrative Coordination, Operation Iron Echo. Spectre decrypted the body. "In exchange for public cooperation with media exposure," Spectre read, "you will be granted a classified clearance slot in Military Intelligence Command, contingent on confirmation of public engagement outcomes." I closed my eyes for a moment. It wasn't just about stealing a story. It was a trade deal. My operation for Ethan's promotion. I felt my jaw tighten. "Keep digging," I said. While Spectre continued his sweep, another name popped up on my screen. Sarah Jennings, investigative journalist, sister of Sergeant Cole Matry. She messaged me directly. "We need to talk. I've got something on Liam." I met Sarah at a diner off I-395. Vinyl booths, bad coffee, and better privacy. She was already there, flipping through a small notebook. "I started digging after what happened to Cole," she said. I didn't like how the story shifted, and I really didn't like your name disappearing from it. She slid a small recorder across the table. I've been tracking Liam's meetings. He's met with at least 4 military correspondents in the past month. All off the books, no transcripts. She clicked play. My sister, Liam's voice, smooth, casual. She's got medals, sure, but don't confuse luck for talent. The real skill? That's knowing how to shape the narrative. Sarah paused the recording. I also have a source, junior staffer. He overheard Liam saying the whole Ethan campaign was a cleanup job for your PR. I shook my head, biting back something between a laugh and a scream. He wasn't just helping Ethan. He was positioning himself as the handler, the genius behind the myth. And I was a tool. Sarah pushed a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, journalist communications, metadata from the stories, IPs, timestamps, evidence of pre-written quotes. They planned it all weeks in advance, she said. Before Ethan went on Fox and Friends. I whispered. They knew exactly what they were doing. She nodded. They wanted you out of the story, out of the picture. I left the diner with shaking hands and a folder full of betrayal. Back in Arlington, Spector looked up when I entered. Check this, he said. Up came a new screen. You recognize this email address? I blinked. It was my father's personal Gmail. Spector said, he's not careful, never was. He opened a chain of emails, plain text, no encryption, like 2 old men gossiping over a drink. Except these 2 were General Kincaid and Harrison Stone, my father. The subject line, Behavioral Patterns, Riley. I sat down slowly. Kincaid had asked for psychological context, and my father had delivered. He wrote about me in 3rd person. Riley has always shown volatility under pressure. She resents male authority, prone to outbursts and idealistic rigidity. May require monitoring for long-term leadership stability. I stopped reading. Spector whispered, he gave them the profile they needed to justify your takedown. He didn't need to plant false evidence. He just let my scars speak louder than my record. And he handed them the knife. I stared at the screens, at the emails, at the timeline we'd built. Father, brother, cousin, mentor turned adversary. Each played their part. Each saw me not as a daughter, sister, soldier, but as an obstacle. And yet, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. That night, I sat alone in the dim light of Spector's bunker. Folder in one hand, black coffee in the other. Sarah's evidence was solid. Spector's data airtight. The threads were clear, converging at a single point. But strategy wasn't about emotion. It was about timing. I opened a worn notebook, the one I kept from my days at command school. On the inside cover, I had scribbled one quote years ago in red ink. Know thy enemy, know thyself, and in 100 battles you will never be defeated. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I turned the page and began outlining Phase 1. We wouldn't go public yet, not until the foundation was rotted enough to crumble under its own weight. We needed one more piece, one misstep from their side to trigger everything. Spector prepped the packet. Sarah began prepping a teaser for the press. And I started rehearsing a different kind of mission briefing, one where my weapon wasn't firepower, but evidence. One where the battlefield wasn't foreign soil, but live broadcast. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not out of exhaustion, but resolve. The hearing room was packed. Capitol Hill, Committee on Armed Services, C-SPAN cameras live-streamed everything. The walls felt like they were sweating under the tension. General Adrian Kincaid sat on the front row in his full dress uniform, the sheen of metals across his chest like armor. To his left sat Liam, polished, pressed, unreadable. And next to him, Ethan Vance, clearly coached, clearly smug. And I walked in through the center doors, spine straight, in my own ceremonial blues. I didn't smile. I didn't waver. The air changed the moment I took the stand. A senator from Delaware opened the session. General Riley Stone, you've requested this opportunity to respond to serious allegations. The floor is yours. I nodded once and adjusted the mic. For 15 years, I served this country in silence. I planned missions, protected lives, and accepted the cost of wearing this uniform. I never asked for recognition. I only asked for truth. But truth, it seems, was inconvenient. I paused. The room didn't breathe. And now I will show you exactly why I was suspended. Not because of wrongdoing, but because I knew too much. I motioned to the staffer. The first video appeared on the large screen behind me. It was Ethan on Fox and Friends, describing the Iron Echo mission. Polished, scripted, full of dramatic flair. Then I played the mission audio, black box feed from our operation in the field. My voice, barking orders, coordinating airstrikes, saving Sergeant Maitre's team under live fire. There was no Ethan, only me. A murmur rolled through the gallery. I raised my hand for silence. Ethan Vance was never on that mission. He told a story that wasn't his and sold it to America. Kincaid's jaw tightened. I nodded again. But he didn't act alone. Another slide appeared, email exchanges between Kincaid and Ethan, promises of a future position in military intelligence tied to Ethan's public cooperation. He was bribed, I said, to lie in exchange for a career. I saw Ethan glance sideways, his hands fidgeting. Let's move on to Liam Stone, I continued. Senior Public Affairs Officer at the Pentagon. I tapped the clicker. On screen, metadata showing Liam's private meetings with key defense journalists, timed days before their articles published, citing anonymous sources discrediting my work. I played the audio. My sister? She's got medals, sure, but don't confuse luck for talent. The real skill? That's knowing how to shape the narrative. Liam didn't flinch. I did not blink. Then came the final blow. I want to turn your attention to this correspondence, I said, my voice razor sharp. Up came the email string from my father, Harrison Stone, to General Kincaid. No encryption, just cold, precise language. Riley has always demonstrated volatile emotional patterns, resists male leadership, prone to acts of insubordination cloaked in moral righteousness. I let the words hang. He didn't defend me. He armed my enemies. A long pause. No one in the room moved. I turned away from the screen, faced the panel. Senators, these were not investigations. They were assassinations of character, strategic, calculated, and political. This was not oversight. This was orchestration. The committee chair, an older Republican from Arizona, leaned forward. General Stone, are you saying that the suspension was retaliation? I'm saying it was theater, I replied, and they forgot who taught drama in this war. The room cracked, some quiet chuckles from press, the rest still stunned. I closed my folder. I faced General Kincaid. You tried to bury me, but all you did was dig your own grave with documentation. You underestimated me. That's your legacy. Then I turned to Liam. You weaponized the media because you didn't have the guts to confront me in person. That's your legacy. And finally, to my father. You once told me leadership wasn't about glory. It was about sacrifice. I guess you forgot that when you sacrificed your daughter for a dinner invitation. I stepped back from the mic. Not a single hand clapped, but the silence? It was the sound of truth, landing like a gavel. After a long moment, the chair cleared his throat. This committee will enter executive review. We thank General Stone for her testimony. I turned and walked out, head high. War won. I didn't head home after the hearing. I walked straight to the reflecting pool in front of the Capitol, pulled off my gloves, and stared at the glassy surface like it might crack from the weight of everything that had just happened. Eva Rostova called. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew what this moment meant. Behind me, reporters began to gather. Some shouted my name, cameras rolled, but I wasn't ready to speak to them, not yet. Not until the official transcripts were sealed. Not until the ripples began to hit command chains. That evening, Spectre sent me a message. It's done. Press picked up the footage, trending in under 12 minutes. Ethan just deleted his social media. I didn't smile, not out of bitterness, but because justice isn't joy, it's relief. I walked back to the secure flat in Arlington where I'd lived for weeks. Inside, Sarah Jennings sat at the kitchen table, typing fiercely. She looked up. "It's already hitting networks," she said. "You're being called the General of Truth. You know that, right?" I shook my head. "That's dangerous." "No," she said. "It's overdue." We didn't toast, we didn't cheer, we just sat in the calm. I opened my notebook again, wrote one sentence on a clean page. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Because cleaning out rot doesn't stop with one room. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not out of anxiety, but instinct. The kind you sharpen in war zones when every breath before dawn feels like borrowed time. I sat with black coffee and my father's last email still burned into my memory. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't retracted. There was no follow-up message, just silence. But silence was its own admission. A new message arrived, this time from a junior officer at Fort Bragg. It read, "Ma'am, just wanted you to know, everyone here's watching, and we're proud." One line. But it cut through more than 1,000 press headlines ever could. That's when I realized this wasn't about one hearing or one career. It was about something far bigger. What we normalize, what we excuse, what we choose to challenge. I folded the email, slid it into the front pocket of my notebook. That same notebook held every strategy I had written since this war turned political. Phase 2 would not be about vengeance. It would be about reconstruction. The kind that starts with naming what was broken and refusing to rebuild it the same way. That's how institutions change, one refusal at a time. The air along the Potomac carried a chill that morning, thin, gray, unforgiving. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I needed time to breathe before he showed up. I found the bench he'd mentioned in the email, halfway between the footbridge and the boathouse. It was quiet, shielded from joggers and morning strollers. The river moved slowly beside us, like it too was holding its breath. My father arrived 6 minutes late. He looked smaller somehow, slower. His once imposing shoulders seemed to slope under a weight he finally noticed. "Riley," he greeted, voice low. I nodded, not standing. "Mr. Stone." He sat down beside me, hands clasped tightly in his lap. I wanted to say I'm sorry. There was no conviction in his tone, no weight, just air. "For what exactly?" I asked, still watching the river. "For all of it, I suppose," he muttered. "I thought I was protecting the family legacy." I finally turned to face him. "Legacy?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it? A web of lies, control, and betrayal wrapped in a family crest." He winced but said nothing. "I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove myself worthy of your name," I continued. "But your name doesn't mean truth. It means silence. And I'm done living in it." He tried again, this time with that weary paternal softness. that once worked on me as a child. Whatever's happened, I'm still your father. I shook my head. You stopped being my father the day you chose strategy over honesty. When you gave away parts of me to protect a legacy I never believed in. When you tried to erase me and called it love. I pulled the old house key from my coat pocket and set it on the bench between us. That's for the farm. I won't be back. He stared at the key like it might bite him. I stood. This is the last time we speak, I said. Goodbye, Mr. Stone. I didn't wait for a response. I walked away. The wind from the river caught the edge of my coat and pushed me forward. It felt like release. A week later, headlines rolled out like dominoes. General Adrian Kincaid retired with disgrace. No ceremony, no salute. Ethan Vance expelled from West Point. The Academy issued a rare public statement citing ethical violations. Liam reassigned to a quiet base in Montana. He didn't call, neither did I. Sarah Jennings sent me a copy of the transcript, uncut. The hearing now part of public record. Then the call came. General Stone, the president's chief of staff, said over a secure line, "The president would like to offer you a formal promotion and a new strategic advisory post at the White House." I let the silence linger a few seconds longer than necessary. "I'm honored," I replied. "But I'm not interested in a new rank. What I want is to rebuild, on my terms." The line went quiet, then a soft, "We respect that." That evening, I sat with Eva Rostova on the back patio of her Arlington townhouse. She poured 2 bourbons and lit a small fire in the stone pit between us. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "I survived it. There's a difference." She nodded. "You're not going back, are you?" I looked up at the night sky, cloudless and infinite. "No," I said. "I've seen what rot looks like when it wears stars on its shoulders. I want to build something different." She raised her glass. "To burning down what no longer serves." I clinked mine against hers. "To planting something better in its ashes." We sat there in silence, no plans, no strategies, just breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting. I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't pretending I was okay. I was simply free. The next morning, I opened the small leather-bound journal I'd carried through every deployment. Most pages were filled with coordinates, strategic sketches, fragments of field intel. But now I turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "What does a life look like when it's built from truth?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the old answers, the ones handed down by my father, by the institution, by the silent code of duty above all, were done. I reached out to Jax that afternoon. He was already working on something new, a digital archive for whistleblowers inside the defense system, anonymous, encrypted, ironclad. "You in?" he asked. "More than in," I told him. "I'll fund it myself." He whistled low. "Damn, you're not playing around." "No," I said. "I've played their game long enough." Later that day, I went to visit Sergeant Colematry, now in rehab after another surgery. He smiled when he saw me, despite the pain in his eyes. "You took down giants," he said, with words. I shook my head. "With truth," he nodded. "Same thing." Before I left, he handed me something wrapped in cloth. It was his unit patch, faded, scorched on the edge. "I want you to have it," he said, "because you didn't leave me behind, ever." I swallowed hard and slipped it into my coat. That night, I sat by the window with my notebook open again. This time, I wrote, "Let them inherit ashes, I'll inherit clarity." I didn't go back to the Pentagon, I went home. Not to the Stone family farm. I had left that behind with the old key and the ghosts that never learned how to let go. Instead, I bought a modest piece of land on the edge of Jefferson County, Missouri. Acres of oak trees and open sky, far enough from the past but close enough to rebuild something honest. That's where I founded the Stone Institute for Honorable Leadership. The name wasn't about pride, it was reclamation. I was taking back the word stone, not for legacy, but for foundation. The Institute became a sanctuary, not of silence, but of voice. A place where young officers, returning veterans, and civilian leaders came to learn the kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind that holds. We taught ethics in combat, humanitarian strategy, resilience of the mind. We told the truth about war, not just its violence, but its moral weight. What it takes to keep your humanity intact when everything around you asks you to surrender it. Some days were hard. There were faces in those lecture halls that reminded me of my own reflection a decade ago, tight-jawed, closed-hearted, trying not to drown in invisible wounds. But then someone would stay after class, ask a question, cry, laugh, offer a story. And healing would begin, not from me, but from the space we'd made together. One overcast afternoon in early spring, my mother showed up. I was kneeling in the memorial garden, pulling out winter weeds when I saw her brown boots step onto the gravel path. She didn't say anything right away, just crouched beside me and picked up the trowel I'd set aside. We worked in silence, the kind that wasn't empty this time, but willing. When the last flower bed was cleared, she reached into her coat pocket and placed something in my palm, my first marathon medal. The one I thought they'd thrown away. It was polished, smooth, like it had been waiting. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't brave." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just closed my fingers around the medal and nodded. I wasn't forgiving her for the past. I was forgiving myself for carrying it so long. Weeks passed, classes grew, applications tripled. One evening I stood at the back of the main hall, watching a group of cadets laugh over their notes and coffee. The whiteboard was still marked with notes from the last session: philosophy, tactics, purpose. That night I wrote a new lecture. Not about victory, not about medals, about betrayal, loss, and how those things, if faced with courage, can shape the kind of leader no school can fabricate. I opened class the next morning without preamble. "What makes a leader worth following?" I asked. Silence, and then stories came about broken commands, saved lives, mentors who had failed, and moments they could have given in, but didn't. When it ended, I walked to the board and wrote 4 words: "Honor is not inherited, it is built." I stood beside it for a moment, the marker still warm in my hand. That was the legacy I wanted. Not one carved in stone, but one planted, watered, lived, and finally let go. That night, after everyone had gone, I walked the perimeter of the land. The stars were clear above Missouri, unbothered by memory, untethered from bloodlines. I found myself thinking not about battles or hearings or betrayals, but about the simple rhythm of rebuilding, of mornings that began with black coffee and the hum of cicadas, of veterans in work boots clearing trails behind the lecture hall, of planting something that would last longer than I ever would. I kept a stack of books in my office, worn copies of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. Most had notes in the margins, left there from my time in Kabul, in Seoul, in Arlington. I taught from them not as doctrine, but as invitation, to examine, to choose, to live with principle when applause and rank were gone. One of our cadets, a young woman named Ortiz, stayed late one evening. She was restless, eyes sharp. "Ma'am," she said, "how do you know when to stop fighting?" I thought of my father, of Ethan, of Liam, of the battlefield and the boardroom and the Senate floor. When the battle costs you more than the wound, I said. When you realize peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of alignment. She didn't write that down. She just nodded, and that told me she understood. I wasn't building a legacy of power. I was building a place for truth to breathe. And that was enough. If you've stayed with me all the way here, thank you. This wasn't just a story about betrayal and power. It was about choosing who we become after the ashes. Maybe, like me, you've carried wounds others never saw. Maybe you're still rebuilding. I hope Riley's journey reminded you that truth, when lived out loud, can be healing. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it, and let me know. What does your legacy look like? Until next time, stay strong, stay true.